Welcome to the Relationships Inside Out podcast with Doctors Gregory Siebert and Kimberly Murray, licensed marriage and family therapists. Join them on this journey as they explore the ins and outs of relationships.
Well, welcome to Relationships Inside Out, where today we're going to talk about panic attacks.
Panic attacks, people often use that interchangeably with anxiety attacks or anxiety. And these are all separate yet related constructs. And so we want to break down each one of them, but also talk about what are panic attacks and what the heck do we do with them?
Yeah, and they're common, and most people will experience at least one, maybe two in their lifetime. They may not know it. Oftentimes it gets confused with medical, right?
Yes.
So somebody will end up in the emergency room quite often.
Heart fluttering, palpitation.
Heart attack, or they feel like the fear of heart attack is a very common one, or stroke or something. Depending on the symptoms, right? Some people may not, and we'll go over the symptoms later, but one of those is chest palpitations.
Yep.
Some of them might not have that, but they might have like dizziness or something, and they're just kind of really feeling unsteady, and they might have, and then also abdominal distress.
Yeah.
That might cue like, oh, I might have the flu, or something's wrong with me, or
disorientation, hyperfixation, rumination. There's so many pieces to this.
Yeah.
So at a base, anxiety is a sense of worry, a chronic sense of worry, where often we're thinking about future things, maybe past things, but we might ruminate or think about something on repeat. We might worry about our performance, about our family, whatever it might be. That is a really common sensation, especially in American culture, where it can show up for specific events. It can show up in a generalized sense. It can be
for specific people,
driving, flying. It may be context specific, but it's that more general feeling. It doesn't make you necessarily stop from your daily living. It's just discomfort within the body.
Yeah. Boss calls you into the office.
Oof.
Uh-oh.
My boss is the worst. For those who don't know, I'm self-employed. And then anxiety attack and panic attack is a higher intensity of that anxiety.
Sudden onset too.
Yes. So anxiety attack typically is a little bit longer. It might be more hours, even days for people where we're really not feeling good. So that increased heart rate, maybe we're sweating, we could be tearful, whatever it might be. Panic attack is the same thing, but much more abbreviated and much more intense. So the peak of a panic attack is usually about 5 to 7 minutes from the start with a quick decline.
And it may last 10 minutes, and it could last a little longer. It just depends on the individual. And they are sudden onset. And oftentimes I find that there is a trigger.
Yes.
There is a cue. But before we get into that, let's talk about symptoms. So
symptoms, yeah.
We have accelerated heart rate, we have sweating, we have shaking, trembling, we have shortness of breath. We even have maybe like a choking sensation.
Oh, yeah.
Chest discomfort or even pain, right? And
muscle pain.
That could be associated with the chest palpitations, right? The pain. There's abdominal like distress, even nausea for some.
Some can even vomit.
Yep. And then dizzy, feeling unsteady, lightheaded. You might even feel like detached from yourself, like disassociated. You feel like you're in this outer body experience, looking down on yourself, experiencing these symptoms. Like it might not feel real.
Irritable, disoriented. People may talk to you and you may not be able to vocalize or respond as you normally would.
It also had like the fear of just losing control or being out of control, or like feel like you're going crazy, fear of dying. And typically that's associated with the symptoms.
Sure.
Like, oh, I'm having these symptoms. Like I'm dying. I need to go to the emergency room. Because they're very intense and they're very scary. Because even me as a therapist, when I experienced one, I was like, "Oh God, what's happening?" The first thought goes to physical, but then you also have numbness and tingling sensations, or you might even have chills or hot flushes. And what's important about this is you might experience some of these symptoms in general, but the thing about it is it might increase under anxiety, and panic attack. So there's a lot of symptoms, and you only really need 4 or 5 more. For it to be diagnosed as a panic attack.
And how mine shows up might look different than my partner, my friend.
Yeah.
It's important to remember that just because yours doesn't look like someone you know, it doesn't mean you're not experiencing panic or anxiety. It really is individually specific.
Yeah. And the cues might be different, right? Some might be anticipated, like we're going up for a speech.
Sure.
Going in for an interview, or maybe I had a recent car accident and now I'm going to start driving again.
Oh, yeah.
There's some that you anticipate going in there and just that build up, and then all of a sudden onset of these physical symptoms. kick in. Some of them, the cue is a little less obvious. We're not sure. Sometimes I've had with clients, if you look at the anniversary date of a traumatic event, it's right around that time. And a lot of times it's hard to be aware when you're in these moments. It's hard for people to even want to look back and say, what did happen before that? Because that moment of that intense symptoms makes it's too salient to think about what else is going on.
And it can be compounded. So if I know there's a stressful event coming, maybe on a good day, I wouldn't have a panic attack. But because I didn't sleep well last night, I didn't get enough protein this morning, my kids were already irritating me, my clothes don't feel good on my body. These other irritations start to compound, and thus my nervous system is primed. It is already in its fight or flight state. It's already feeling really irritable. And so that extra stress of the speech, seeing my mother-in-law, whatever it might be, sends me over the edge.
And those, I like how you said that, the compounding, because sometimes it's not just one trigger, it's really the summation of them. And this is why it's hard to find a cue, like a specific trigger sometimes, is because it's multiple building up, and then it's just you're flooded and at a point to where now the physical symptoms kick in.
They can be scary. So Greg, you identified you've had them, I've had them. They can be scary, even as mental health professionals who know what to look for, know what to do to treat it, all the things, they still happen. And they're still scary in the moment. And having and we'll get to supports and what to do, but having that support system around you that's aware of it can be a good, helpful buffer too. Right? So if your partner knows that those happen for you, maybe they're paying attention to your cues. Maybe they're saying, hey, hon, I noticed you're not sleeping good the last few days. What can I do to support you in self-care?
Understanding that stress is a compounding factor for this, sleep, or maybe keep them away from certain, like if there's a traumatic event and they associate certain things with that, maybe kind of keep them away from that.
Those stimuli,
stimuli. It's tough because for many people, we don't want to associate physical symptoms to mental health. And panic attacks is very much one of those. Something physically is wrong. Something physically is wrong. And granted, that fear of something physically wrong is going to be greater than, this is a panic attack. Because panic attacks generally, like you said, they absolve. And then after a while, once you're used to them and you realize nothing bad's going to happen, you've never died from them. And then when you learn skills to control them, you get more confidence. They tend to decrease in frequency quite a bit. But before that, our mind is really cued on the physical. And I think us talking about it's going to be important to normalize that it is okay to have a panic attack. Many people have them.
And you'll get through them. Right? I liken it for my clients as to a wave, right? You're going to ride the wave. The hard part that can be associated with a panic attack is if I've had them before, even one, I know that sensation. I don't like that sensation. So the second I start to feel anything like it, I start to fear a panic attack. And now I'm starting to ramp myself up. And so I may not even having one, but now I've worked myself into one just by being afraid and anxious about being anxious.
Yeah. And that's part of criteria for panic disorder, right? Where we've had panic attacks and now we fear them, and that tends to elicit.
We trigger ourselves essentially.
And that's kind of one of the treatments that we work on a lot with panic attacks is more cognitive based and working on the thoughts, interrupting them. And with a lot of clients that I've worked with this, typically what I hear is, well, what if this happens during this? What if this? And it's really working. And we said in previous episodes, cognitive behavioral therapy. So we're working really on the cognitions and helping condition more adaptive and balanced thinking, because our brain in these moments are trying to protect us. It fears that. So we're just going to associate anything with that as bad. I'm going to avoid. In this case, we want to condition more balanced perspective, because it's not necessarily balanced when our brain's protecting us. It goes to worst case scenarios. So if you're feeling a little flutter, I'm going to have a panic attack. That's worst case scenario. Working in adaptive thoughts might look something like, doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to get a panic attack. Even if I did, it's okay. I've been through them before. I know what to do. That in itself sometimes is enough for people to not have them as much or if at all anymore.
And what you're talking about is engaging different parts of the brain, right? So panic, worry, fight or flight lives in our midbrain, our limbic brain. It is the part that controls our emotion. It helps us identify threats, fears, these sorts of things. With cognitive behavioral therapy, a form of getting us to think more rational and reasonable in our thinking, that brings us to our forebrain or our prefrontal cortex. And so it's engaging a different part of the brain. The The hope of that is then it gets that limbic system to cool down so it's not so reactive. The more we can do that on repeat, the easier that becomes, right?
Yeah.
The more I can practice moving my brain from limbic to forebrain,
Mhm.
the easier that becomes. So this is a rehearsed skill or sets of skills that ideally we want you to also practice not just in a panic attack, but when you're calm. So it's
Mhm.
easier to move the brain that direction.
Or before. So
Sure.
if it's in the situation where you have a lot of stress and that could, set one on, you might use adaptive thinking around those to minimize the stress, so that intensity of those stressors together don't lead to a panic attack. And going back to like the access to that part of the brain, sometimes I work with the clients to ground first. You might not have access to that prefrontal cortex. They have this beautiful adaptive thought that's like, oh yeah, I remember, I've been through this. This is normal, I'm safe. So you might have to ground, right? So we've talked again before about interventions such as 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, right? Focusing on your senses in the moment. 5 things you see, 4 things you can physically feel around you, like air, temperature, your weight,
clothes, your hands,
hair on your neck, or if you're on the phone. 3 things you hear, 2 things you smell, and then you take a deep breath. The one in this case would be like a 4-4-8, meaning we inhale through the nose for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, and then breathe out for 8 seconds, like you're breathing through a straw. And any mindfulness or grounding technique like that has always been designed to be a la carte. So if a client wants to only focus on the things they see for a couple minutes and then do that 4-4-8 breath 20 times, totally fine. If they want to do box breathing where they draw a box and then, when they're drawing the side of the box, they breathe in and then they breathe out and then go down the box, breathe in again. There's different ways to ground, and grounding techniques I feel like are extremely helpful in the middle of a panic attack.
Oh yeah.
The thoughts, you may not have access to them in the moment, but they help before and maybe even after for recovery.
But we do have access to behavior, and that's what we're talking about there.
Yes, exactly.
And I love what you said about a la carte, because again, what works for Susie Q in her panic attacks may not work for you. Or what worked for you on Tuesday's panic attack may not work on Friday's panic attack. So giving yourself, I call it a buffet of options to have different techniques or tools at your disposal. So if something doesn't work, you can pivot, or your partner or your friend can help you pivot if they're with you.
Yeah. It's tough because it is so scary.
Yeah.
So, we talk about these behavioral things like these are ideal.
Absolutely.
Not all the times are they effective, depending on the severity. So you might need medication. And you might need medication plus the psychotherapy, which is extremely effective together. And then after you build the skills and kind of the frequency goes down, you might be able to titrate off. That's okay too. There's nothing wrong with this, but not being able to function in life because of fear of a panic attack or having a panic attack, that we don't want.
That's miserable.
Yeah.
Right. Having this sometimes, that's okay. If it starts to dominate your space or your mental space, that is a sign we've got to shift, right? And what those tools look like. So in addition to what you were just sharing, also another one, and it goes with the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, is finding colors. Like I'll have clients, if they're actively in one, I'll say, find me 5 blue things, and then 6 brown things, and then 7 green things. That can be really helpful. The reason this is helpful is it takes the brain out of whatever it's ruminating, worrying about, and puts it in the real moment, right? Now I have to focus on this exact moment, this present moment, and it removes the ability, or removes the perception of threat, right? It tells my brain I'm going to think about something else. Again, to your point, it's ideal, and that can be one way to change it stylistically that could be helpful for people.
And before we started this episode, you mentioned ice, and I want you to share that.
Yeah, ice is a huge one. So the most effective method, and I'm talking about the literal frozen ice kind. The most effective kind is ice water on your face. It is not pleasant. It's not meant to be. The reason that this is so effective is ice, one, makes you gasp, resets that nervous system, but it moves you from a sympathetic or fight or flight state to a bit more of a parasympathetic. It kicks you out of that worry, and you can't help but to focus on the present moment. It's unpleasant, right? So if you're having a panic attack and can safely do so, submerging your face in ice water is great. If not, ice packs, standing in a freezer, but face, neck, wrists, and feet. Feet, I caution some people, it makes them more agitated, so testing it on yourself. But the other ones, those nerves, it helps to really soothe them. Even chest can be helpful with our vagus nerve. But ice is a phenomenal tool. In fact, we're seeing a lot of like medical clinics having ice on hand, not because of fear of injury, but to help people panicking before a procedure. And it's lovely.
Because it's very intense, very quick, and it's another physical stimuli. It's like, wait, the brain's like, what the hell?
So you have to focus on that. You can't focus on the bullshit you were just on because I don't like the ice.
Well, and it's interesting with my research, when we were doing research at the university, we were very interested in stress, and mine was self-control and regulation, both on individual and also dyadically. Well, in previous studies, people have used ice water. We had to stop using it because we were measuring heart rate variability, and it just kind of like washed everything out. We're just like, oh yeah, that's too powerful. Like it's way too strong. So it makes a lot of sense of why that would come in and abrupt the panic attack.
And you can try swallowing ice water. Problem with that is a lot of people experience a tightness of chest or throat in a panic attack. So the last thing we want to do is add a feeling of drowning or choking. But if that works for you, going for that. But ice, that is my number one I teach people if it's available to you and it feels safe to do so.
And some of the stuff we've talked about have largely just been about in the moment, either before, during, or a little bit after. We also want to think about self-care, especially if we notice that it's an amalgamation of stressors, right? It's like just a lot of stressors built up. And so focusing for yourself on a maintenance of self-care is extremely important. And it's really about being more resilient and increasing that resilience or capacity to manage that stress that we're going to experience. And unfortunately, sometimes in life, those stressors increase and we don't have control over them. But being able to put yourself in a position to take care of yourself, to increase your capacity to then face those to where it might not lead into a panic attack.
So if I know, okay, the holidays, they aren't far away, folks. They are not far away. If the holidays are something, I know, I'm here for it. I'm ready for that pumpkin spice.
Walmart was already putting up Halloween stuff.
Have you been to Hobby Lobby? They put Christmas up in July, friend.
Oh my.
You're behind. Goodness. You're behind. Okay. I'm here to tell you. You should have bought that back in June.
I only shop on Sundays and they're closed on Sundays. So I'm just kidding.
But with the holidays, if you know that's a stressor for you.
Yeah.
We don't wait until the week before, say, Christmas to start that self-care. I want you to start it now. I want you to get your happy light out now. I want you to start practicing yoga or exercise. I want you to start getting some extra sleep, eating well. Prepare your nervous system. The nervous system has the ability to react in real time, but it also needs love well ahead of time. We can't repair the nervous system 2 days before, but it can react 2 days before, if that makes sense. Repairing the nervous system, repairing our adrenal glands, for some people takes months, even years in a traumatic event. Give your adrenal system, that's what produces cortisol or our stress hormone. Give your adrenal system and your nervous system time to soothe, to heal, to prepare well ahead of the stressor if you can. Now, this is ideal, right?
I was just going to say, this sounds
ideal. Happen, deaths happen, these in the moment things happen.
Loss of jobs,
that you can't prepare for. But when you can prepare, do it, right? If you know you're primed for that, or we've talked about winter blues in here, go ahead and start that SSRI if you have winter blues, right? We've talked about
if that's your form,
right. Some people choose to take an antidepressant for just the darker months of the year. If that's you, start it, right? Do the things that help you with self-care so your nervous system is primed to cope, not primed to panic.
And you, as us as people, have control over whether we use these interventions or not.
Absolutely.
We don't have control over what stressors might come in or not all the time. And I find that when clients are like, we don't have time. And it's like, well, what do you want to prioritize?
You got to make time.
Trying to put out all the fires all the time, or prioritize yourself and know that fire at some point, like there's some things you just can't do anything about. So prioritizing that self-care, which you do have control over, will impact those stressors in a positive way versus just putting out the fires, not having skills, not taking care of yourself. You're not at capacity. And as you said before, if you know you've had panic attacks, you know, maybe there's a pattern at certain times of years, certain places, things like that. Absolutely get on something like this for the long term.
Sure. And panic often is centered around loss of control or perceived control. If you can control other pieces around you, your body isn't waiting for that out of control moment in the same way, right? Because it has perception of control in other ways. Also, like we mentioned earlier, if you can practice these skills when you're not panicked, it is so much easier to practice them when you're panicked.
I have clients who are like, well, I didn't have a panic attack, so I couldn't practice. It's like,
no. Every day we're going to practice.
Yeah, because you really have to get them conditioned in so they're readily available in your brain when that happens.
Yep.
Right. Even an adaptive thought. I'll work with clients, we'll come up with one. They're like, this might work. And they're like, well, it didn't come up. And I was like, well, how many times did you practice that? Because the more that you write it down, the more that you practice these things, the more readily available they're going to be, the more you're able to remember these. Because if we just try to rely on recall in times of stress, recall is shit.
You don't have free recall when you're stressed. Think about it. If you're running from a bear, I don't have time to do free recall. I got to run from that damn bear.
Yeah.
I've got to have the skills in the moment that don't require free recall.
And maybe not even a real bear, but perceived bear, which is a lot of times this is when we talk about panic attacks, it's this perceived threat when there's no real threat. Right.
The perception of I'm out of control. What am I going to do? What is my family going to do? Am I dying? Whatever it might be. Yes, it feels like a bear in the body. And so just like if you were running from a bear, heart rate increases, respiration increases.
Yeah.
It's the same sensations. You have got to practice for that moment when we're not in that moment. So your brain has that highway, so to speak, already built.
Encoded. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think about the perceived, I think about high school going back there, which was very stressful for a lot of middle school.
Don't make me go back there.
But the perceived threat, the bear, was if someone was talking about me or what do they think about what I'm wearing? And it's very interesting that on a physiological level, it's responding very similarly as like a real threat.
Or a spider. Spiders are the same.
Maybe.
They're mini bears.
For some.
For us normal folks. But it can be, and as I say that, right? Like spiders, they disrupt my nervous system and I can't even tell you how quick because I can't fathom it in my brain. My body's already responding before I even cognitively know what's happening. Mm-hmm. Other people can look at that spider, no big deal. Just squish the damn thing or leave it be.
Yeah.
That is how unique this process can be for people, right? Getting on stage for some people, no big deal. Walk in the park. Other people, that is their worst nightmare.
There's times where I've felt like I was going to fall off the stage because I'm lightheaded.
Defending my dissertation was that moment.
Oh, I was blacked out. Wait, what happened?
It was so bad.
So the other thing is if we know there's situations that cause this, another form of approach might be exposure therapy, to where it's called systematic desensitization. I can't even say that right half the time. And it's where we gradually, in a way that's not overwhelming, right? Not throwing the deep end kind of thing. Like say it's practicing getting on stage and giving a speech. Maybe you gradually work towards just looking at the stage for some.
You're just thinking about the stage to start.
Just thinking about it, then looking at it, then maybe stepping in the back of the stage. So it's just gradual steps. And the more that you practice them, even if you have to think about it, and that takes, I don't know, 2 weeks where you just thinking about it. And then once you think about it, you have less charge. Then we move to the next step. And as you work to a point where you have less charge on it, you're desensitizing to it through exposure. And this has been a very, very effective,
incredibly effective
approach to phobias, which often can set panic attacks.
Are you suggesting I do this, Greg?
I don't know. I have no.
Yeah, spiders. It's been suggested more than once. But yeah, it can be incredibly effective. There are all kinds of different therapy modalities. So if panic is something you struggle with, don't be shy to reach out to a qualified therapist. Ask for help with this. Ideally, they have the tools. There are therapists that specialize in anxiety and panic disorders.
And most likely they've experienced one too.
100%.
Nothing's wrong with you if you've experienced one. This is your body protecting you, and sometimes it's overprotective. And there is a potential genetic component to this that they think of because they know if parents have it, the child's more likely to have it. And can have it rather. And they think because of that, there might be some genetic component to it. And it makes sense from maybe the framework that the physiologically more sensitive to negative stimuli or emotions. And so it's more easily set off or put into motion rather.
I imagine there's also, and I don't know this, but that there's also a modeling component, right? How I see my parents handle stress, cues to my brain, subconsciously or not, how I should handle stress. And so I imagine that's part of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you're neurodivergent, I'm an HSP, a highly sensitive person. So is my daughter. We are both far more prime to anxiety than my husband, right? He is neurodivergent with ADHD, but his sensitivity to stimuli, his sensitivity to noise, to whatever it might be, he is a much higher threshold for that stuff than I do.
Yeah.
So I have to be aware of that in myself at a different acuity than my husband or my oldest daughter. She's a lot like me. I've got to be aware of it in her far more than I do my 3-year-old.
Yeah.
And it's okay, right? I'm meeting it with, this is something that's about my child, not with judgment.
Yeah.
Sometimes we want to judge it or say this shouldn't happen, or I'm weak, or my kid's, something's wrong with my kid. Try to move out of that framework of it being problem-centered or being negative into something of, okay, this is part of me. How am I going to work with it?
Yeah. And I love that, because in the acceptance work that therapists can work with, the more you push away from something, the stronger it becomes.
100%.
So when we work towards it and we get comfortable with it, kind of those adaptive thoughts we talked about earlier is, I'm safe. Like nothing bad happens when this happens and I can get through it. A lot of that is kind of like turning into it and being okay with it. And then it dissipates versus continually fighting it. And PS, these symptoms cannot be onset by substances or like a medical condition or things like that, because these symptoms do overlap that. And
they can.
And we definitely advise that medical place is the first place you should go, unless you're aware that this is something that you experience. So a panic attack technically can't be diagnosed unless there's for certain that no substances or medication or medical or another, like
medical abnormalities.
Yeah. Or medical or mental health diagnosis explains this.
Sure. So. And it can be hard to parcel those out, which is the benefit of seeking support medically, mentally, whatever it might be, so that someone else can help you parcel it out from an unbiased perspective.
And if you're comfortable with medication and not therapy, that may be a route. I've had clients that have gone that route and terminate with me. They're like, I'd rather go medication and see where that goes. Or they've seen me and then the medication has helped so much and they had just enough tools to kind of leave. Or some people don't agree with medication, so they come see us and they want to work on it and learn the skills that we've talked about.
And pairing both, I highly recommend that if that's something you're comfortable with. I liken medication. Some people have to use it for a lifetime, depending on how your body produces things like serotonin. But the original intent of mental health medication, specifically SSRIs, I want to be really clear. So antidepressants, is it's meant to be like a cast on a broken bone. It's meant to help you have capacity for healing. It's meant to help you through the series of moments. It is not meant to be a forever thing. And people worry, if I get on these medications, it's a forever thing. And that doesn't necessarily have to be true. What other tools are you adding to that, right? To help cope as well, to help bridge that gap. But I want to put that disclaimer out there of, yes, some people choose to use it for a lifetime, but that doesn't mean it's a requirement.
Yeah.
So if you are someone with panic, anxiety, anything in that realm, there are medications that you don't have to do for a lifetime.
Yep.
Well, this has been another episode with Relationships Inside Out, where today we talked about panic disorder, panic attacks, and we're hoping that you get to walk away with some tools of how to help you or a loved one who might be going through this. As always, if you have any questions, concerns, feedback, please feel free to email us at relationshipsinsideout@gmail.com. Thanks.
Thanks.